Have you ever experienced power loss issues in your car that are transmission related or gearbox related, and your mechanic tells you that you need to replace the entire gearbox? Would you believe me if I told you that that is not entirely the case sometimes? Here with me, I've got two components. I've got the pressure plate, not the pressure plate honestly, but the clutch, and this one is used in manual transmission. And here with me is the torque converter. It's quite heavy. The torque converter is used in automatic transmission. So today I want us to understand how they work and how to differentiate when either of the two components is faulty. So I'll start with the clutch. The clutch has quite a number of components, but here with me I've got the pressure plate, this one that you see over here, and attached to the pressure plate is what we call a clutch disc. Now, I've drawn a very simple illustration to show how the whole thing is attached, how it's organized in your car. So over here I've got your engine. This is the engine. Then we've got the flywheel, because you know the flywheel is attached to the engine. Now from the flywheel, we've got this pressure plate. This pressure plate over here, it's usually attached to your flywheel like this. Your flywheel is attached, as in the pressure plate is attached to the flywheel. So they spin together as a unit. And now we've got this disc. This disc is usually in between them. It's in between your flywheel and your pressure plate. And now here's a very interesting part. When you look at this disc closely, you see these splines over here. That is where the transmission shaft or the gearbox shaft is fitted in. So let's assume this is my gearbox shaft. It fits in here. So when the disc rotates like this, then my transmission shaft or the gearbox shaft spins too, hence power is transmitted from the engine to the gearbox. Now, what happens is this. How do you know when the clutch has failed? First of all, there are a number of components that can fail in your clutch. And let me start with this disc. When you look closely at this disc, it's got these friction linings. Now, the whole mechanism is based on friction. So if the friction linings are worn out, it simply means that friction, the necessary friction will not be present. And if the necessary friction is not present, then that will definitely hinder the gear shift. So if the friction linings are worn out, then it will affect the gear shift. Another component that can easily fail is what we call the pressure plate. Let me hold it like this. When you look at this, there's this part over here, and this one acts like a spring. We've got our release bearing over here. So the purpose of a release bearing is to depress this part over here so that this disc can be released. What do I mean by being released? When you step on your clutch pedal in your car, when you depress it inside, what happens is that you're pressing on the pressure plate. When you press on the pressure plate, then this disc is no longer attached to the flywheel. When this disc is no longer attached to the flywheel, it simply means that power is not being sent to your gearbox. And when power is not being sent into your gearbox, it enhances smooth gear changes. That is one. So if the pressure plate is faulty, maybe it's not functioning as it should, then that will definitely hinder the gear shifting. Another thing is the release bearing. If the release bearing is faulty, don't forget its work is to pop in, pop out. Pop in, pop out. If it's not functioning as it should, then it will hinder gear changes because the disengagement of this clutch disc will not operate as it should. Now, how do you know that the clutch is the issue and not the gearbox? Let me start with how do you know when the pressure plate or when the pressure plate or the release bearing is faulty? Simple, pedal play. When you depress your clutch pedal, it has a specific play that should be there. But if you realize that the pedal play is off, then the culprit is either the pressure plate or the release bearing. Now let's go to slippage of clutch. When you experience that the clutch is slipping, then the culprit is worn out friction linings. And let me caution you against this because I'm a culprit. I have a manual car, and one time I was told that my clutch disc, the friction linings are worn out. And I decided to go for the option of padding it. That simply means going and fixing other friction materials on the clutch plate. I would highly advise against this. And that is because if the friction linings are worn out, then you see these springs inside here. These springs over here, they act like dampers and as in reducing the whole vibrations and the noise. So if the friction linings are worn out, it goes without saying that these springs, these damper springs, are on their way out. And believe me, you don't want to always keep on putting the gearbox down to change the clutch. So consider changing the entire system if one component is faulty. All right, what can result into accelerated wear of the friction linings? Because they're supposed to wear out at on even intervals and not on very short intervals. If you give your manual car to a learner, someone who is really not conversant with the whole gear shifting, depressing the clutch and everything, they result into something we call burning the clutch. And now, burning the clutch result into accelerated wear and tear on the friction linings, resulting into clutch slippage. Now, let me go to the torque converter. I'll use a very simple illustration of a torque converter. I don't want to use the jargon that you may not understand. But when you look at this torque converter, there is this part over here, and we've got this side over here. And now this dome-shaped thing, I think it looks more like a spaceship or those UFO things we talk about. Anyway, inside this thing, we've got blades. We've got the impeller, we've got the turbine, we've got the stator. The impeller is connected to the flywheel. The turbine is connected to the gearbox. And now the stator is the intermediary that now helps in the multiplication of torque. So there's a fluid inside. Actually, if you look at my hands, I've got fluid inside. What happens is that now the blades, they spin the fluid. The impeller, let me start with the impeller because it's the one that's connected to the engine. Now the impeller spins or pumps the fluid, then sends it to the turbine, and now the motion of the turbine is now, it results into the transmission of power to your gearbox. So if any of these components is worn out, then definitely your torque converter will be at fault. The other components inside, their clutches, their bearings, their solenoids. If either of those components are worn out or faulty, then your torque converter will be faulty. But now, let me highlight a very specific, is it specific or characteristic reason that you will blame your torque converter entirely? Because when it comes to slippage of gears or hard shifting of gears, you can easily blame either the torque converter or the gearbox. But no, this one is specific to the torque converter, and that is the overheating of your gearbox. If you realize that your gearbox is perfectly okay, but there's overheating, then the culprit is the torque converter. And all you have to do is just replace the torque converter and your issue will be sorted out. All right? Now, let me caution against this. When it comes to getting the parts replaced, when it comes to changing any component in your car, I always advocate for going, as in visiting a trusted mechanic or a trusted garage. Why do I say this? I say this because these two components are a mechanic's gold mine. What do I mean by a mechanic's gold mine? It is because mechanics have a way of exploiting you as the car owner. Understand one thing, for you to replace the torque converter or for you to replace the clutch, you have to separate your gearbox and your engine because they are the intermediate components. So when it involves changing either of them, it's tedious work. And now, the more the work a mechanic does, the higher the pay. So what happens is that the mechanic wants to do a lot of work, and at the same time, they also want to get a higher pay. So they will end up condemning the gearbox so that you can end up replacing the gearbox and not the clutch, because a clutch is very easy to replace, by the way, and so is the torque converter, but then it has a lower pay. So what happens is that your mechanic will tell you to go and you need to change the entire transmission so that they can get a fatter pay. And now when that happens is that it ends up costing you as the car owner. All right, let's understand one thing. Many of the times is when you change the transmission and the gearbox was not the issue. Maybe you're living in a rental or something. You don't want to go with the whole junk to your rental. So what happens is that you will leave the gearbox with your mechanic. When you leave the gearbox with your mechanic, it means more money to the mechanic because they can always sell the gearbox later on. Or maybe wherever you went to source the new gearbox, they've already cut a deal with the dealer or with the shop owner. So later on in the day, after you've already replaced the gearbox, they'll go for their cut. So always ensure, before you replace the gearbox, ensure that The clutch is not to be blamed. The torque converter is not to be blamed. And that is where I always advocate for Precision Automotive. Okay, I know I'm not tooting Imran's horn or anything, but Imran is really honest. So if you've got any car-related issues, any power loss issues, kindly visit Precision Automotive. We are located along Moringa Road, Kilimani, and we'll get your issues sorted out in a way that is satisfactory to you as the car owner. And now finally, if you've not yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, kindly subscribe. This is where I share informative and educative car content tailor-made just for you. Thank you.